Hi everyone, it's Tamara here for lalalandcrafts with another card making tutorial. This time I'm using the new release stamp set for Halloween, Get Spooky. I'll be doing some Copic colouring of the images, some ink blending of the moon, and a simple card making tutorial using dies. So let's get started. I've grabbed out the Get Spooky clear stamp set and I'm going to actually stamp out 3 of these. Initially I'll stamp out 2 using some Copic Express it with my Misty. So I'll just pop that in and just turn that to the side. I'll grab my 2 images that I'll be using and my Memento Tuxedo black ink. We'll get them stamped up onto our Copic Express it cardstock. Give that a good rub. And to make sure I've got a good impression, I'll give it another stamp out. And give that a nice press down, especially around their mouths. So now I'll just turn on some music while I do some very simple Copic colouring. Grabbed out a piece of smooth white cardstock and the Halloween stencil set to do a ink blended moon onto my front panel. With my Make Art station, I've just put a little bit of low tack tape to hold my piece of cardstock in place. And now I'll just get our moon stencil. I have put a little bit of washi tape around all the edges just to make sure I don't get any ink on my card front where I don't want it. So I've sealed up all those edges. We'll just put a little bit down on this side and then we'll start with our ink blending. I've grabbed out my Spun Sugar ink blending pad. When I've tried it, I have realized that it's very, very dry. So I've grabbed out my re-inker, given it a really good shake, and we'll just get that Spun Sugar re-inked up. So get a nice amount put on there and try and just get that to squeeze back into that sponge. I'll grab out my foam applicator, give that a nice push down to get that ink in there. And now we've got plenty of ink to go onto the base of our moon. So we'll get a nice smooth blend over that moon front. Now we'll grab our crater layer of the stencil, and I've actually kept the other stencil in place so that will hold our crater stencil in the exact spot, just using that magnet to hold that in place. And I've grabbed out my Kitsch Flamingo and a brush applicator to make sure I get into all the nooks and crannies of those moon craters, and giving it a nice smooth blend all over, making sure I get into all the bits. We'll pull that off, and now we've got the perfect nice pink craters to match our Spun Sugar base. So we'll get that main layer off, being careful as we remove that off our nice clean white panel, and we'll set that aside to dry. I've grabbed out the Get Spooky set again, and I'm just going to do some white heat embossing on black cardstock for our sentiment. So I'll grab out my Misty and get my piece of black cardstock in place with the sentiment set in place. Using my anti-static powder tool, get some down to make sure our heat embossing powder only goes where we need it. Give that a double stamp up, and our folded piece of white printer paper and white heat embossing powder, and we'll get that sprinkled on. And I'll preheat my heat gun tool, go in the back first and then to the front until that's nice and melted. Now, out of black cardstock, I'm going to cut out the spooky house die, the spooky fence die, the mushroom grass border, the 3 clouds dies, and also the hard candies dies. So I've grabbed out my Spellbinders cutting machine and just going to place a few pieces into this first panel. And now we've got our house and one of our clouds cut out. So we'll set that aside while we cut out the rest. We'll grab our grass border and a couple of the other cloud dies, pop that through our die cutting machine until we've got all our panels cut out in the black cardstock. So we'll pull out those panels and one of the fence dies, setting them all aside, and then we'll cut out our final layers of our hard candies, our other fence, and our final cloud die. So run that through the die cutting machine. Oh, it had moved, so make sure that it's all lined up and hold that top panel in place as we run that through our machine. And we've got all our pieces cut out ready to go for our assembly. Now I've grabbed out the scallop sentiment labels die and just using a bit of washi tape to make sure that stays in exactly the right place. Just pop that down on the end and run that through the die cutting machine. And now with that holding it in place, we've got our perfectly cut out sentiment. We'll set that aside while we work on our other pieces. Now I've just used a Copic marker to match in with the pinks that I've used for my moon and also the other pink kind of splashes of colour on our ghosts. Using a pencil, I'm just tracing around these openings because I want those pink accents to shine through the windows and also behind our candies. So just tracing around the outside of all of those elements. Once I have got that all traced out, I'll grab out my scissors and just cutting on the inside of where I've done my tracing. I know that I'll have the exact size colors needed to hide behind those windows and just have that beautiful pop of pink showing through. So I'll do that now for the other window and also the candies. Now just adding a little bit of glue to the back of the house. I'll get that pink panel glued onto the backing. Just making sure that's all lined up and not showing from the outside except for those pink openings of the windows. We'll get that to the bottom window, making sure that's all lined up. And with the door, I just was going to keep that black, not have any pink showing through, because I will have one of the ghosts standing in front of that. So I didn't worry about getting that coloured pink. But to make sure that the door is secured, I've just grabbed some washi tape and just taping that down. That will hold that in place until we get that attached to our card front. Now I'll just get the window openings glued in, so just putting a small amount of window on all those panels, and we'll get that slotted into place, and we'll do that for the top and the bottom window as well. So with these little applicators, they really make it easier to slot everything in and not have too much glue on those surfaces. So we've got a little bit of glue on that one and we'll slot that into the top. And we'll do the same for our candies as well, just putting a little bit of glue around the opening where those pink pieces will sit. Slotting that in, and we'll do the same for the second one. I always make my panels a little bit bigger than what I initially need. That way I always know that I can cut it down to the exact size, ensuring that everything's nice and centered. I will have all the measurements for this panel in the description box below for you. So we've got that nice and centered. I'll just trim a little bit off the top, and then I'll trim down the bottom to make sure it's exactly the size that I need. I just realized that this guillotine that I've got isn't quite long enough, so I've grabbed out my ruler to make sure it's the size that I need. I could have just grabbed out my trimmer. It most probably would have been a lot easier that way, but I've got that kind of set in there roughly where I want it. I'll grab out my ruler and just make sure that I have cut that in the right place, which thankfully I have. So now we've got our perfect size panel, which I've attached to the front of a scored card base. I'm going to trim off these little mushrooms because I do want some of the candies nestled down in the grass. So we'll just keep it so that it's just the grass only. Now I'll just roughly place out where I want everything to sit on my card front. So I'll place down the fences at the back and the house kind of sitting in the front of those. The grass right down the bottom, kind of nestled up to the doorway. We'll get our clouds kind of spaced out around that moon. Our candies will be tucked in the grass at the bottom. And then we'll have our little ghost walking his dog down the bottom, the other two floating above around that moon and above that fence. I always like to take a picture with an old phone that I have, and that way I've got that exactly the way that I want it, and I can use that as a reference as I put everything in place. I've grabbed out my T ruler, just putting a small amount of glue on all of those panels. We'll get that all stuck down. So we'll grab out that T ruler and make sure we're going to line both these fences up in the exact same spot. So we'll grab the other one, pop it on some glue. And this is a nice, really thin applicator. So with these little intricate dies, it works perfectly for just putting a small amount of glue on your die cuts. So we've got that fence in place, and that's all lined up perfectly using that T ruler. We'll get our house glued down. Now I've grabbed out the big one because it is a bigger die cut. So I've got a lot of glue on those bits, and just on the smaller portions I'll grab out that smaller glue applicator now to put on the smaller portions and just smooth out that glue that I've already put on there, and we'll get that attached to the front of the card. Give that a good press down. Now with our little ghosts, I'm going to put them on with some foam tape to get them propped up above our scene. So we'll get off all the release paper and get our dog walking ghost to the front of the house. And we'll also have to put some foam squares on the back of our grass, and then we'll have our candy nestled in amongst that. We'll just get that placed down, try and knot it to get it to stick to my fingers. And we'll removed all the release paper, and we'll get that attached to the base of our card, just lining it up along that base of that front card base. That's nice and straight there. I'm just going to place out everything else and work out what I want stuck down and what I'll have propped up with foam tape. So with the clouds, we'll get them stuck down completely. Just working out with that sentiment, making sure I'm putting our cloud in the right spot. And we'll get our final cloud just placed down the bottom there. Just grab my other ghost to make sure I'm putting this in the right spot. Get that working out exactly where I want it. And now we'll get our candies popped down the bottom. So again, I'll just prop them up with a little bit of foam tape so that they're kind of nestled in that grass, which is also propped up with the foam tape. I've just got my little foam squares so we can just fit them in perfectly along there. And I've taken off the release paper again. We'll just set them down in amongst the grass, kind of propped up against that fence. Perfect for Halloween night. And just adjusting which angles that I want them at. So I've grabbed some black foam squares for the sentiment, which I most probably should have done with the grass as well, but hindsight. So I've got that on our sentiment, taken off the release paper and just lining that up so that's nice and straight on our card front. And then we'll get foam tape on all our rest of our ghosts. Just making sure I'm getting the right size so nothing pops through. Same with our little candy cane ghost. Get off the release paper, then we'll get them attached to the front of our card. Just line that up. I just want him above that fence, and then we'll have our other one just up above the house. And this is the finished card for this tutorial. I've been really hanging out to do a Pink-O-Ween card, and with this set I thought it would be perfect, especially with that great moon stencil. I hope you've enjoyed this card making tutorial. If you have, please hit the like button, and if you'd like to see any future videos, make sure you hit the subscribe button. Thanks so much for watching. Have a great day. Bye.